Welcome to another episode of Aging Choices Unfiltered. I'm Terry Sullivan, co-founder of agingchoices.com and Aging Choices Unfiltered, and I am joined by my co-host, Brenda Limon.
Hi, Terry. I think our listeners are really going to enjoy today's discussion. We're talking about the financial aspect of senior care and uncovering the true cost of senior living. We will be joined by Ted Doyle, the Vice President of Marketing and Communications of LCB Senior Living. He's really going to talk about the true value that you are getting with senior living. I think it'll be a great show.
Yeah, I think it's really important for people to understand. I think there is definitely a preconceived notion that senior living is expensive. And, I think Ted will be able to share some light on what's included in senior living. But both you and I have been through it personally. So with my grandmother, she did a buy-in model. And there were a lot of nuances of that buy-in model that we weren't aware of, or maybe we were aware of at the beginning, but it was so overwhelming. And then some of my experiences helped you with your experiences.
Exactly. So when you're going in, what what to expect, but also what to look for. So he really kind of will dig deep into, the true cost. So I think it'll be
the value. And the value that you get, right? Some people think of it as rent, but there's so much more that goes into running a senior living building. So
exactly.
Let's welcome Ted Doyle, the Vice President of Marketing and Communications with LCB Senior Living. Ted, hey, thanks for joining us today.
Hey, it's my pleasure. Nice to be here.
Appreciate it very much. So can you share a little bit about your background and the services that LCB Senior Living offers?
Sure. I personally have been a marketer for 25 years in a variety of industries. Although the last 10 years has been exclusively in senior living with LCB. LCB is a Norwood, Massachusetts-based developer and operator of senior housing. We do independent assisted and memory care. We have 28 communities either active or in development right now throughout New England and Pennsylvania and New Jersey. So we're creeping down the eastern seaboard, and we have about 1,800 associates in the company and about 2,000 seniors that we serve.
Awesome. Fantastic. So the topic today is a straight talk around why consumers perceive the cost of senior living as high and experience what some might call a sticker shock when they start to research senior living options. So, let's talk about that.
What do I say about that?
Yeah.
I think that people think that the cost is high because it is.
Yep.
It's it's not a cheap product to buy. It's something that you really have to kind of peel back the layers to understand. It's expensive, but life is expensive, and the things that you're needing as you get older are expensive. So, if you're talking about a $6,500 a month rent, which is not unusual for a one-bedroom apartment in one of our buildings with assisted living services, you are getting the apartment itself, which is a full apartment with kitchenette and bathroom and everything private. You're also getting 3 meals a day in what is essentially a very nice restaurant where you can go anytime you want and eat whatever you want. You're also getting help with the activities of daily living, which includes things like assistance bathing and dressing and perhaps medication management, things that make life a little easier for a lot of our residents. You also get things that are easy to qualify, hard to quantify sometimes. Isolation. Probably the most important thing that we provide our residents is relief from being alone and not being socialized. That's something that it's very hard to hang a price tag on. Being around friends. More importantly, even, is the idea that you're as a senior, your life is narrowing down as you get older. The things that define you start to fall away. You're a theater person, or you're an ice hockey person like Brenda. But you don't want to go to the games anymore because you don't like to drive at night, or it's just too much of a hassle to get there. A lot of us who are younger feel like, oh, well, that's their choice. They just don't want to do it anymore. But the fact of the matter is they're resigning themselves to the fact that their world is shrinking. When someone moves into one of these buildings, all of a sudden they can go to a hockey game if they want to go to a hockey game, or the theater. They can go on a date. They can go out to dinner with their friends, because we'll transport them to those places. We'll make it happen for them. And all of a sudden, a person has the chance to reclaim who they are at essence. And that, what kind of price do you put on that? So relief from loneliness, a reclamation of who people are at their core as people. All of those intangible things, security, safety, peace of mind, that if something happens to them in the middle of the night, there's someone there to take care of them. That if they're sick in the morning and they can't get up, someone's going to come looking for them because they're not at a meal.
Right.
Those things are really priceless when you think about it. And a lot of people don't think about that when they're looking at the price of assisted living.
I would agree. I mean, those are all like excellent points. It's really about educating consumers on what's included or not included. And I think one of the things that also people don't realize is what it takes for you as an operator to have those chefs, to have the people. I mean, maybe you can talk a little bit about, what does that operations environment look like, from the perspective of the types of employees you have, and what is the resident to, a care team or staff ratio inside of one of your beautiful communities? And I think most people don't really understand that.
I mean, at our busiest, we probably have 25 to 30 people in the building working, doing a variety of things. Anyone who's ever worked in a restaurant, like I did in college, has seen that operation from the inside out. And that's exactly what we have in our building. We have a full service, full scale restaurant. So we have chefs, we have prep cooks, we have sous chefs, we've got dishwashers, we've got servers, we've got essentially a maitre d'. So it's a full-scale operation within the building. Then we also have a full maintenance staff, which takes care of the day-to-day operations of the facility. Then we have a full care staff, which includes nurses and caregivers of a variety of types. And then we also have the management staff in the community. So because it operates as an independent company. So we have an executive director, essentially a CEO, and then we have a business office director, and a marketing director, and sales director. So all the functions, care director, that you would expect in any company, we have inside the building. And those people are on site in a variety of combinations, 24/7. So it's a very involved operation that is expensive to maintain. The food service, I'll focus in on that a little bit. One of the guys, the founders of our company, one of the guys likes to say, if I had to eat at the Four Seasons every day, I'd get pretty sick of the Four Seasons.
Yeah.
And it's my favorite restaurant.
Yeah.
And we have that problem because people are eating all of their meals in our restaurant inside the building. So we put a ton of focus on varying the menus. We have an incredibly involved, large menu for our restaurant. It's bigger than most full-service restaurants anyone goes to. And we rotate that constantly, seasonally. We're out seasonally buying vegetables and meat and produce from local farms. Just constantly varying the menu and making sure that the food is interesting and good for our residents. We hire chefs who have experience at 4-star restaurants. We go out and find someone who's kind of sick of the 4 p.m. to 2 a.m. gig, like the typical restaurant, and prefers the 7 to 7 hours roughly that they would have in our building. And so we are paying a professional, accomplished chef to run our restaurant. So that's a big focus. Our engagement program is a very big focus. I mean, we are providing the vessel within which someone lives their life. So it's not good enough that it's bingo and doing arts and crafts and things like that. We've got folks in our buildings who are well-educated and traveled and sophisticated and have seen things. And so the life that we provide for them is about intellectual stimulation. We have continuing education classes. We affiliate with local universities to have lecturers come in and graduate students come in and talk about their topics or the focus of their studies. We have professional musicians come in. We have theater companies come in. We take people out to performances and things like that. It's a full-time program, 7 days a week, that gives our residents an interesting and varied lifestyle. It's super important, and that obviously takes a lot of resources as well. it's things like that people don't necessarily think that much about.
Yeah, I think, and Brenda, please feel free to jump in, is that there's that sense of purpose kind of piece, right? It's really not about becoming less dependent on care and support. It's actually about leveraging those tools, those programs, the care teams, the staff in the communities, the enrichment programming folks in the communities to actually encourage someone to live more of the life that they want to live. So sometimes people look at it the opposite, like if I have to move into assisted living, I'm giving up my independence, where actually it can be the opposette.
When it's working right, is exactly the opposite.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, we always talk about
it is ironic. We're basically, people are as they get older, they stop going to life as much. They stop going into the city. They stop traveling to be stimulated and have fun. So as you get older, really, it's important to bring life to a senior. And that's what our communities do. They put the senior right in the middle of life again, and they can be as involved or not involved as they want. They want quiet time with a book. They can retreat to their apartment and do their thing. It's a beautiful balance, really. I think
also
really amazing.
I think also being with like minds. I mean, Terry and I have talked about that. I mean, Terry loves to sail. I mean, even when it gets to the point you can't sail anymore, you want to be with sailors, and
that's right.
And that's important too for intellectual stimulation.
Well, psychologically, it's huge. I mean, we always say that. It's like, yeah, you may be an opera fan, and when the time comes when everyone's leaving to go to the opera, you might decide you want to take a nap and not go to the opera, but it's your choice. And that makes all the difference. In our communities, we really we keep things as open to choice as possible. That's one of the reasons why we have the dining program that we have, we call it Anytime Dining. Because, it's kind of a drag to think of going to move into a place and they say, okay, you're eating lunch between 11 and 1. And, you'll sit at this table. It really kind of, it's a little bit of it's a little childish, really, to be told when you have to eat and all that kind of thing. We really try to restore choice into people's life so that they feel like themselves. Yeah.
One of the reasons I don't like to go on a cruise ship is because I don't want to be told when I have to eat. That's one of the things that I didn't like about being on a cruise ship.
That's one reason.
Yeah, it's only one.
I have only one, cruise, and I don't think I ever will.
What I don't get about cruises is that it's like we're in St. Bart's and I'm staying on the ship. It's like
exactly.
I want to be in St. Bart's.
For the cost of senior living, I think what are some of the other things people should consider when really trying to evaluate staying at home and versus moving, when it comes to the financial piece, that's always a barrier.
Yeah.
How do you talk to your prospects about that?
It requires a certain means, obviously. For our buildings, we typically expect that our residents will have a home that's worth about $500,000. We tend to be in communities in New England and beyond that support that kind of real estate value. Our residents are in their 80s usually, and so having an asset like that is enough to support them in an assisted living environment. That's certainly part of it. People can use long-term health policies to pay for assisted living, veterans benefits. But it's not, a community like ours is not for everyone. That's for sure. I don't know about you guys, but every 30-year-old I come across, I tell them, buy a long-term care policy right now.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
You want to meet with your financial advisor. You definitely want to go to the community, meet with the people there. When it's working right, it's a constant flow of communication between the resident and the business office and the family to make sure that no one's spending beyond their means, that they're in good shape in that regard, and that when a move might have to happen, everyone sees it in advance and can deal with it properly. That's kind of in broad brushstrokes, if that answers your question. The other thing I was going to say that you kind of touched on a second ago, and it's a little bit off that topic, but it's important when you're looking at communities, is looking at like-minded people. You want to be in a community where if you're an intellectual, you want to check and see if, do they have a New Yorker, group that meets once a week to talk about that week's issue, or do they go to the opera, or if you're into sports, do they do things that are oriented in that regard? It's really important, and different communities have different personalities that way.
Yeah, that's such a good point. When my grandmother moved into a CCRC in Massachusetts, at first we moved into assisted living. It had a couple different models, and turned out she was having lunch with folks every single day that were more further down the line of higher acuity. And she was so unhappy, Ted. She was miserable. So the staff at the community, the teams, she was really giving them a hard time. She was giving other residents a hard time. And it turned out that it was better for her to buy an independent living apartment and just bring a little help in when she needed it, because mentally she was so sharp. So I think that what would be helpful for our listeners is we often lump everything into senior living. Can you just give just a broad brush, large explanation of the difference between independent living, assisted living, and then of course memory support is somewhat self-explanatory, but there are some nuances of that are important to know, and then how the prices change with that.
There are so many flavors these days. Now that it begins in over 55 or active adult communities. But when you get into our realm, independent living is a private apartment with all the services I've mentioned, except for the help with the activities of daily living. So you don't have personal care, one-on-one care on a daily basis.
Right.
That's the lowest price point in our buildings. And it's usually people who are getting to that point where they will need services. They're living at home, maybe a spouse has passed, or they just don't want to be a burden to their children or other people. They want to know that they're in a place where they'll be taken care of.
Or take care of their home anymore, right?
Yeah, but this kind of independent living is not like other types where, you're living on a golf course and they mow the lawn for you. So
right.
This is more like living in an apartment building.
Sure.
Assisted living is all of the above, with usually an hour or so of daily care. Again, it could be an escort to a meal. It could be remembering medications. It could be help with dressing if you've got arthritis and buttoning buttons is difficult. It's little non-medical things that you need a little bit of help with. In assisted living in Massachusetts, and as it's licensed pretty much across the country, there's no medical interventions whatsoever unless a doctor comes into the building and does that. And then when you get into memory care, it's typically a secured part of the building with a keypad entry because of wandering risks with people with dementia. In this kind of combined atmosphere, it tends to be lower acuity memory care. People, again, who don't need medical intervention. In our buildings, they get a non-pharmacological program of therapies that address emotion, intellect, physical aspects of living, and really are designed to slow down the progression of memory or dementia, generally speaking, and keep people happy and engaged. It's really not, obviously, sadly, it's not about reversing it, because that's not possible, but it is about putting people in an environment where they can have success on a daily basis and feel fulfillment and happiness, which is possible if you don't fight the disease so much. I mean, what happens at home often is that the families, it's so upsetting to see a loved one go down that path that they'll try to interrupt the thought patterns when dad thinks that you're his brother. And you say, no, Dad, I'm not your brother, and you get upset. People will get upset because it's upsetting. Whereas in a professional environment, people will go with that thought and steer the person around without agitating them and making them feel bad about the moment, because you're still in there when you've got dementia and you're still aware of kind of what's happening with you, as anyone knows who's been through it. But those are generally the differences. Then, so outside of our building, you would have a nursing home, which would take a higher acuity memory care sufferer, memory care resident.
That was a pretty accurate decision. Pretty accurate description.
Yeah. And on the independent side, of course, there's all kinds of choices, including continuing care retirement communities, which have everything from semi-detached homes to a nursing home, all on the same campus.
Right.
Is that an adequate answer?
Yeah, I think that was fantastic. So, when you look at these different levels of service, and it's something to keep in mind when you're looking at a senior living community or an option is, can they support you through? What can they support you through, right? And what services? So with the costs associated with those as you go, what's generally included and what's not included? And are there, in listening for our consumers, are there any hidden costs that maybe they should be aware of when they're looking at senior living? Or future costs, right?
Well, there's two basic models of senior living. There's a buy-in model and there's a rental model. With a buy-in model, you would put down a large sum of money. It could be as high as 7 figures, depending on where you are, which you get back at the end, and they essentially get interest off of your money while you're there, and you will pay a monthly rent as well, which tends to be lower than rent in our communities.
My grandmother was like that, but we didn't get the full percent back at the end either. I think it was 70% or something like that.
That does vary. That's true. That's something to obviously pay close attention to if you're shopping. It kind of depends on how large that sum is. If they're making enough in interest, then they'll give you more of it back, and it's that kind of thing. But with a straight rental model, there's almost always a community fee. We charge a community fee, which basically contributes to life in the community, and basically is all about you utilizing all the services that you're going to utilize over the course of your stay. It's a one-time fee. That can typically be $3,000 or $4,000, something like that up front. And then there's a monthly rent. Rent varies based on size of apartment and services rendered. So in one of our typical communities, we tend to be in nicer areas of the states we're in. So I'll just take Hingham, Massachusetts, for an example. That community, a studio with no services is going to be around $4,000 a month, $4,500 a month. If you get a one-bedroom, that's going to bump up with no services to around $6,000 a month. And then if you get a two-bedroom, it'll go up to around $7,500 or $8,000 a month. If you add services to that, it's going to be about $1,000 more at each step of the way. And that will get you an hour of personal care. And then if you are in memory care, that's going to be around $10,000 a month, depending on the living situation you have, whether it's a shared or a private. And that's commensurate with nursing home rates pretty much. So that's kind of a typical community for us. It does vary market to market and building to building. If we acquire an older building, obviously it doesn't command the same rents that a brand new building like Hingham can command. So it does change a little.
And Ted, so they all have, the apartments all have kitchens. Are the residents in I don't know if your community is different, but are they required to pay a separate fee for the food service?
Our rates are inclusive. So if you're paying for assisted living services, that's your rent, food, service.
So it's not a meal plan that's on top.
No, and it's not a separate meal plan for anyone in our buildings. It's part of the rent, and it's required that everyone who lives in the building partake in it.
And no matter how many meals they do, whether they do 1 meal a day or 3 meals a day, it's an included fee. Okay.
It's all part of the fee, yeah. They do have kitchens. Their residents do have kitchens in their apartments. They don't have ovens. There are country kitchens on each residential floor. So if residents want to get together and cook and have a meal together or bake or whatever they want to do, they can do that. But we don't have them in the apartments. And there's licensure issues around that with fire marshals.
That makes sense. Now, you mentioned long-term care and veterans benefits as potential ways to pay for senior living, but most of the time it's private pay. Are there any other sources that could help? And then the second part of that question would be, do your executive teams in the communities help people navigate those benefits to see if it's covered, or do you work with partners? How do you do that for the consumer?
Do it directly. I mean, there are plenty of people out there who are there to help seniors think about this and families think about the financial part of it.
Yeah.
but yeah, I mean, Medicaid can help in certain communities. We only have one community that does accept that. There are some affordable apartments in some buildings, like some places where we build, the town asks us to include an affordable component.
Yeah.
So, for instance, our community in Ipswich, Massachusetts has an affordable 10% affordable set aside. But I don't want to be coy about it. It makes it more affordable. It's still not what people would probably consider to be affordable.
Right.
If you take a $7,000 a month rent and you peel back the rental component of it, it's probably like $2,200 for a one-bedroom apartment. They look at the market rate, the market rates around your building. So an apartment in Ipswich, one bedroom, maybe $2,000 a month. So they peel that part off and they apply the affordability formula to that, not to the services. Right. So a $7,000 rent might go down to $5,800 a month, which I think most people would agree is not terribly affordable. It makes it more affordable to more people.
Understood. And it depends
that's an issue throughout the whole industry. It's just so expensive to provide the services.
Absolutely. And, we hear a lot in the industry talking about how do they create more middle market, meaning more affordable housing with limited services or some way to support those out there that can't afford it. We know just through Genworth and other sources that the average cost of assisted living across the country is $3,500. But when you're in the Northeast or you're in California or you're in some of these other upscale areas, it's all based on what the real estate goes for in those areas and the cost of hiring people and all of those things. So there's lots of nuances. So we just want our listeners to understand that your market may not be exactly the same,
right?
But no matter what, when you look at it, it's not simply rent. There are all kinds of services that are packaged in or benefits that are packaged in.
And the thing is, real estate's not the problem for the person who needs senior housing.
Right.
Services is the problem. So it's that's the rub that will always exist, unfortunately. And when you talk about other places being average $3,500, but for those economies, that's a lot of money. It's all relative, right? And so I think that, relatively speaking, it's expensive everywhere.
Yeah, and then there is affordable housing for seniors, but
yes.
It is there is such a short stock, short supply of it, and there's a waiting list for several years, and so it's definitely a difficult market.
It is, and there are a lot of smart people like you guys trying to figure it out. We're looking at it. We're looking at other tiers of housing. I mean, it's more than. Everyone's in it, to live and to make a living. But there's a mission aspect of this business. I find by and large the people who run these companies have a heart and are really love serving seniors and love knowing that when you're going to work, you're actually helping someone be themselves again. I mean, what a gift that is. It's incredible to be able to do that for a living. So we're always looking at ways that we can create affordability where it's possible. It's something we are actively doing. Whoever figures out the Walmart, I always say, whoever figures out the Walmart model of housing is going to do very, very well.
Well, I know there's some really, really great groups working on it, and I came from that industry for several years, and there are some groups that are really trying to figure that out because it is such a need. So.
Yeah, it usually involves aggregating services.
Yep, exactly. Yep.
And there are more and more people who are kind of joining collectives. Basically, there's one in Beacon Hill, Boston. They're here and there where groups of seniors will live in the same building or in the same neighborhood and then share the services of a nurse.
Yes, that's right. Yeah.
It's a little more active in terms of having to organize your own life, which is hard for some people, but for other people, it's a great solution.
Yeah.
So this has been amazing, and I think really informative. Is there any last piece of advice or best piece of advice that you have for consumers out there that are looking at senior living and the cost of senior living? Is there anything you'd like to say?
I think that you should make sure and have a detailed conversation with the people that you're looking at, the communities that you're looking at, talking to the executive director and the business office manager to really understand what you're getting for your money and to understand if it's a good fit for you, because you may be able to afford it, but you can still end up being miserable if it's the wrong community for you, for whatever reason. Whether it's everyone there is higher acuity, people tend to be pushed or pulled in the direction of the greatest mass. So if there's a lot of high acuity people, a lesser acute person would tend to progress in their own issues faster, and vice versa is true as well. It keeps people young when there's a younger, more youthful community. But definitely have those conversations so you can really understand and analyze all of the things that your rent is replacing in the life you're living now. Essentially, what we like to say is if you're living in Greater Boston, it's costing you $3,000 a month to live, no matter how you look at it. So if you've got a $6,000 rent you're looking at, peel that part right out, because you're going to spend that regardless of what you're doing. Now look at the rest of it. And what part of this is replacing emotional needs that you have, as well as physical needs that you have. And then you're going to start to see the value. I think the value of surroundings, I love the molding on the door you see behind me here. And I love this batik that's over my shoulder. But, I don't see it anymore.
I thought we were in your living room.
Well, you're in my dining room. I don't see the surroundings. What I experience is how much I like to live in this place, and the breeze that's coming through the window, and the neighbors that I have that I see when I walk outside. It's those emotional things that create value in my life, and what I would miss if I moved. I can go 1,000 places and hang my picture on the wall, but is it the place where I'm going to be happy? So, yeah, it is a reality that you have to have certain assets to be able to move into a building like we have. But sort of all things being equal, the important thing is to make sure that you're going to be happy emotionally where you are, and those are the intangible things. And when people start to think about that, sometimes I go through the exercise with people and say, okay, so how much is having friends worth every month? If you can afford the rent in our community, what's that worth to you personally? And they'll say $1,000 a month. Okay. And so what's it worth to feel safe? Oh, $2,000. And before I'm done, we're at $15,000 a month in rent, because those things are so valuable to people. So, if you have the means to be thinking about this, you have to understand that what you're buying is that, and not 4 walls and 3 minutes.
That was a really great way to end it, because at the end of the day, that's exactly why we wanted to do this podcast, is that it isn't that you're just moving into an apartment building. And when people perceive the prices being high, there's so many moving parts, there's so many people, there's so many programs, there's so much that goes into planning and supporting and operating and these communities. So I think all the things you talked about today are critical for people to know when they're thinking about it. So, Ted, how can our listeners learn more about your services? If some of our listeners are in your areas, sure. Tell us how they can learn. Besides Aging Choices, of course, how can they learn about you?
Well, naturally, Aging Choices.
Yeah.
We can be seen and heard from at L as in Larry, C as in cat, B as in boy, LCBSeniorLiving.com. And you can learn all about us as a company and all about our communities.
Great. Do you have an 800 number or a number they can call to?
781-619-9325. And that will get my desk.
That's awesome. Great. Thanks again to Ted Doyle, Vice President of Marketing and Communications at LCB Senior Living, for joining the show today. Thank you, Ted. If you're interested after today's show and learning more about senior living in your area, please go to agingchoices.com and check out our Choice Wizard and answer a few questions, and we'll help match you to some senior living communities that are right for you.
Don't be a stranger to the show. We want to hear from you. This isn't just our show about senior care options. This is your show. Follow us on Facebook and Instagram at Aging Choices, and Twitter at My Aging Choices, and tell us what topics you'd like to talk about. And visit agingchoices.com for a full library of senior care resources. Thanks for listening.